Welcome back to this week's episode of Millars Movers. We were certainly treated to some more racing this week. The weather played ball. Well, in part, we were treated to more racing. Whether you could watch it is a separate matter, with plenty of fog obscuring the racing. And then there was an incident at Ludlow where they couldn't race because the ground was frozen and hadn't recovered in time. This weekend was the Winter Millions, Windsor on Friday and Sunday, Ascot on Sunday. Certainly gave some good racing. I'm not entirely sure I'm in love with Windsor as a jumps track. It doesn't seem to develop horse into finding much of a rhythm, I don't think, with that quite sharp bend on the turn after the home straight. But there was some good racing there, plenty of prize money put on, and it was well supported with plenty of runners. And I suppose that's where we should start, really, with our weekend review. Friday, 3-mile hurdle race, won by Derry Hassan, Paddy sent down by Lucinda Russell. I was really impressed by him. I watched him back, and I did think that Windsor would suit him. He's a big, strong galloping horse. This was his first try at 3 miles, and he really improved for it. And he improved throughout the race. His jumping got better. Faced a fairly stiff challenge from Honky Tonk Highway up the home straight. Actually got bumped, and I think if he hadn't got up, they'd have had grounds to certainly ask the stewards to look at whether that had impacted the result. But he did get back up. He was really brave on a track that I don't think suits him. So he's certainly a horse that's going to be worth following going forwards. They have said that soft ground is important to this horse, and that was pretty obvious by his large action, so he wouldn't be one to get carried away with going into the spring festivals, because he can need plenty of rain to fall for him to take his chance there. But certainly looks like he should make up into a far nicer chase than he has heard. He was a big, strong horse. He jumps well over hurdles, so provided he carried that forward next season, he'd be one to certainly keep an eye in the early part of the season going over the big fences. The Grade 2 Lightning Novices Chase, rescheduled to Windsor on Friday, was the feature race. The day it saw Caldwell Potter trying to get his career back on track to some degree, as was Gidley Park, who'd had a heart issue when pulling up fairly early on his chase debut at Kempton. It was Gidley Park that emerged victorious and certainly looks like the far superior horse. He was dropping back to 2 miles in trip here. The ground was soft, which would have helped him. He was given a positive ride by Brian Carver, but this is a horse that stays far further. He jumped pretty well in the main. He was a little bit long at the 6th, only just got to the other side. He was a little bit fiddly at the 8th. When he got in tight, he wasn't all that fluent, but largely his jumping was sound. Again, ran a track that perhaps wouldn't play to his strength. He's a big galloping horse, had to be taken back on the home turn by Brian Carver, but was comfortably on top of Caldwell Potter at the end. As for Caldwell Potter, well, what do you quite make of him? They have done their money there. There's no doubt about that. I take no great joy in saying it. I think we've got to be careful that we don't follow these sways of social media that seem to almost celebrate when these expensive horses get beaten. I do think it is a nonsense that this sort of money is paid for national hunt horses, but the owners presumably are taking this on professional advice. I don't think it puts the industry in a very good light. It certainly shouldn't sully the owner's reputation. They're simply paying their money trying to find nice horses, and they're not really finding them. And as for the fact that they referenced afterwards that his feet make him difficult to train, well, you would have to question if that didn't come up in their pre-purchase checks. Caldwell Potter, it's difficult to know what to make of him. At Cheltenham, you could argue that perhaps he wanted to come back in trip. He didn't stay. Whereas if you watched him here at Windsor, you'd say he, for all of his life, wants to go up in trip. So it could just be that he's not all that good. He's going to be a handicapper at best. Maybe he will be a high-class handicapper. Paul Nicholls mentioned winning the Paddy Power Chase at Cheltenham next season. That would be a nice pot to win, but it's almost certainly not what he was bought to win. So he's looking like a bit of a failure at the moment. I really hope they don't go to Cheltenham with Gidley Park. He went to the Albert Barton last year. I think that was a step too far for him at that age. He'll be a nice horse in time. He's obviously had this blip with his heart defect at Kempton. Give him time, bring him along slowly, and he'll be a very nice open chaser indeed next season. On Saturday, all the attention turned to Ascot, and particularly the juvenile watch with Lulamba, who I know pleased Adam Mills, who went to watch him at Ascot on Saturday. Fine, big, strong, good-looking horse, trained by Nicky Henderson for the Donnellys. He is definitely in the mould of Sergino. They clearly have a type of horse they like to buy. He won this very easily indeed. He had to concede a £10 penalty to Mondo Man, who was 111 rated on the flat. Now, wouldn't take this too literally, because Mondo Man did plenty wrong on this hurdling debut. He was far too free through the early stages with Keelan Quinn, and then didn't really finish off his race well. But that shouldn't detract from what Lulamba did. He travelled really nicely. He jumped very well, and he quickened up smartly. And I don't think he had to be in any way extended to anywhere near his maximum to win this, and was going away at the line. Whether you'd be interested in taking the 6-4 for the Triumph now, I would suggest absolutely not. There's still plenty of time for a horse to come out of the woodwork, and we should point out that at this point last year, last year's Triumph winner Majborough hadn't made his debut for Willie Mullins, so there's plenty of time for that to change. I'm sure Willie Mullins would be desperate to pull a good juvenile out of the hat at the Dublin Racing Festival next month, but Lulamba does certainly look like the horse they've got to beat. Mondo Man can almost certainly improve on this. If he learns to settle, that will help his jumping, that should help his finishing effort off. And at a horse rated 111 on the flat, that's a pretty lofty rating to be taking into juvenile hurdles, so he can play a hand yet. And I would just also remind you not to sleep on East India Dock. Recency bias being what it is does mean that we tend to forget horses that haven't run all that recently. He's done very little wrong in his 2 hurdle starts. He was very impressive on his 2nd hurdle start. He's from a yard that know how to train juveniles, so I wouldn't completely dismiss him yet, but I do very much like the look of Lulamba. Also on the card was a win for David Maxwell on indoor. I'd like to mention that because that was his first win without a claim. And I thought he gave him a really good ride. He does come under stick from certain segues of social media, and I do understand why. He's not always the most robust in a finish. He can often get his tactics wrong, but on this occasion he gave the horse a very good ride, sat in behind a fairly strong pace, took it up going to the last. Horse found a big stride. He stayed under decent balance and pushed him out for a good win. And I just think on a Saturday when an amateur like David Maxwell is winning, yes, he puts lots of money in and buys expensive horses. It's a good thing for racing because it's another story that we can get out to the public. The big story was perhaps Cargizi getting turned over, sent over by Willie Mullins, and she got beaten by the Dan Scout and trained Take No Chances, who I thought got a really good ride from Keelan Woods. Very positive. Cargizi was far too free, as she can be through the early stages. She's bound to do better than this with the benefit of run behind her. But what was really interesting is that Keelan Woods played to the letter of the law. He didn't lean in too much, but he was not going to give Paul Townend a clear slingshot up the near side rail. Perhaps just worried Cargizi out of it when she was running on vapours at the end. It was a good win for Keelan Woods, who's trying to rebuild his career, having lost the job with Ben Pauling. And certainly, if you watch him over the last few weeks, he's riding as well as anybody. And then the big race of the day was the rematch of Henderson versus Mullins. Jonbon versus Senegamine this time, and the younger legs, Jonbon, came comfortably out on top. I think this was by some way a career best. He made one jumping error at the first fence in the home straight final time, but he was still very quick when doing it. He got him quite tight. Seems to have this ability to just flick up and out and get back into his stride. He was comfortably on top of Senegamine, but would just caveat up by saying this ground would have been far too lively for Senegamine, even at his best, and he is now an 11-year-old. But whether you can now find something to beat Jonbon, I'm not so sure. I think Gaelic Warriors Arkle win last year, you can pull holes in that form, given what they've gone on to do. Found 50 hasn't really stepped up. Gaelic Warrior, I think, was a little bit disappointing on his own return around Leopardstown. For all that might not be the track that plays to his strengths, but Jonbon is certainly the horse they've got to beat in the champion chase. He was really impressive here. Nico de Boinville clearly knows him very well, and it is now about time that we start to stop referring to him as Duvan's little brother. This is Jonbon, a seriously good 2-mile chaser, and he's going to take all the beating in the champion chase come Cheltenham in March. And of course, Ascot wasn't the only track in the UK with good quality jump racing on Saturday. Haydock Park had the Peter Marsh chase. I'd really fancied Royal Pagai to go well in that, but I knew my fate fairly early on. He very rarely picked up the bridle. He didn't really jump a fence, and his jumping deteriorated from there. I think Charlie Deutsch switched him wide down the back, tried to get him interested. Saw some people question that move, and of course, when the move doesn't work, it's a bad move. But I think the horse was never really going, and he then started to jump violently out to his left as well, which suggests that maybe something was bothering him. You would also point out that Venetia Williams' form. She's 2 winners from 28 runners so far this month. That's not a great return given how she was going through November and December. So there's clearly a bit of an issue with the yard. Royal Pagai didn't give his running. One horse that did was Mr. Vango for Sarah Bradstock. Really big old-fashioned chaser, got given a good positive ride under Jack Tudor, dropping back in trip here, having won the London National last time at Sandover 3-mile 4. This was 3 miles, more testing ground, cheap pieces on, but he made all the running, given a very positive ride out in front, found plenty at the tail end to fend off I Will Do It, who's a veteran, 12 years of age now. I was quite impressed to see him put his run back to back. He was a good runner in the Welsh National. Sam Thomas had previously said he needs plenty of time between races, but he only had 3 weeks this time round. But I Will Do It served up a really good test for the younger Mr. Vango. But the younger horse came out on top under Jack Tudor. And they could entertain now going towards the Grand National on heavy ground. Whether they're going to get that and whether he's type for a Monday National, I'm not quite so sure. Certainly a horse back in the 90s you'd have certainly had in designs for the big Aintree showpiece. But Mr. Van Gogh, really good winner. Royal Bugai didn't fire at all. And Trelawn, he's starting to look like he doesn't stay this sort of trip. He's a strong traveller, strong stay over 2 mile 5. He needs heavy ground. But here, I thought he travelled into the race with every chance and didn't appear to me to get home. So maybe intermediate trips now for Trelawn going forwards. And on Sunday, the action returned back to Windsor. There's 2 races I think we should mention. Matata winning the 2 mile chase. Thought he got given a really good ride by JJ Slevin, but it is one of these things that I'm not mad on at Windsor. It does appear that you can get a soft, easy lead from the front around both the chase and the hurdle track, and he undoubtedly got that here. I think there was a fair few in this field that are perhaps looking further down the line, looking for handicap marks, but Matata got slipped off the front, and under JJ Slevin, he looked really relaxed. Sometimes under Sam Twiston Davis and Darryl Jacob previously, he looked like a bit of a mad sort of character, can race far too freely. JJ Slevin got him settled beautifully, and that might just be the key to bringing out a bit more improvement in this horse. They've talked about going to the champion chase. Now they are, of course, entirely entitled to do that, given his rating. I think it's slightly fanciful to think that he'll shake up the principles in that, but where else would you go if you want a run at the Cheltenham Festival, I suppose? And JJ Slevin might be the key to bringing about a bit more improvement if he can continue to get this horse to settle and race in a slightly more efficient manner. The feature race today was the Fleur de Lis chase, won by Protectorat, who again got an easy lead from the off. J-Lo did try to chase him, as I've already mentioned. I'm not sure Venetia's horse is firing, and he was a fairly spent force turning in. He did, to his credit, plug on into second. Journey with Me was third. He's probably not quite up to this grade, and he certainly didn't stay this 2 mile 6 trip. He's at his best at 2 mile 4. So quite what the form is worth, I'm not sure. But Protectorat is a really well-placed horse. They land plenty of prize money with him for a horse of his ability. They know his his conditions. I saw a few say that perhaps they hadn't played with a straight bat in the Peeper Chase last time out, and that the going left-handed and going right-handed was a bit of a nonsense. But I would encourage you to go back to watch his novice chases. I remember him running around Wincanton, obviously right-handed, and he definitely jumped out to his left there. So I do think left-handed sees Protectorat at his best, as does soft ground. When you then throw in an easy lead as well, he's got virtually his ideal conditions. They will now, of course, head back to the Ryanair, try and win that for a second year in a row. And whilst I do think this year's edition is a deeper contest, if he gets heavy ground again, he will make the winner do a good bit to get past him. He's a really likeable, solid horse. And I say likeable, having been pretty much against him most of his career, but you can't help but like horses that turn up, show their consistency, and Protectorat certainly does that. He's not a superstar, but he's a very fine horse indeed. So this morning we've had the latest round of Cheltenham Festival entries, and this time the novice races, both the hurdles and the chases. Plenty of horses to pick through here, so I've tried to separate them out into things of points of interest, horses that don't have an entry that might have, and horses that do have an entry that you perhaps didn't think would. We'll start with the Arkle, and probably the most notable absence from the novice races at all is Slade Steele doesn't have an entry in the Arkle. I've heard a lot of people talking about trying to find an anti-post each-way angle against Masborough and Sergino, who appear to have the Arkle picture sewn up at this moment. Loda Sud is perhaps not much of an each-way prize against them, and I saw a few people mention that Slade Steele, winner of last year's Supreme Novices Hurdle, might bounce back to a little bit of better form back at Cheltenham, but he's not being given entry by Henry de Bromhead. That would perhaps suggest that they're looking to go towards the new novice or the reinstated novice handicap chase. So no Slade Steele in the Arkle. And then in the Browns, there's no Masborough and there is no Gidley Park. I was really pleased to see that about Gidley Park. I'd be excited to see him brought along slowly. I do think the trip to Cheltenham last year for the Albert Bartlett was a mistake in hindsight from Harry Fry. And Masborough, the 5-year-old, doesn't have an entry in the 3 mile Browns advisory, so that will leave the Arkle as his only likely target. He might just lack a bit of pace to deal with Sergino, but they certainly don't want to be stretching him to 3 miles, for all that there has been talk that he's a Gold Cup horse of the future. Then in the novice hurdles, Palladium, the 1.2 million juvenile purchase for Nicky Henderson, Lady Bamford, due to make his debut this week, had been talk in some sections that after Lalamba had dotted up at Ascot over the weekend whether Nick Henderson would separate out his juveniles and would Palladium have an entry in the Supreme. Well, he doesn't. He's only got an entry in the Triumph Hurdle, but curveball alert, Lulamba does have an entry in the Supreme Novices as well as the Triumph. So maybe if Palladium goes and shows what he's worth this week on his hurdling debut, and you've taken a short price about Lulamba, it might be a slightly itchy time for you if you wait to see whether Nick Henderson does separate them out and does send the juvenile Lulamba into the Supreme. For what it's worth, I don't think he will. He tends to like to run his horses in the correct grade, run novices and novice races, juveniles and juveniles. I do think Lulamba will end up in the Triumph, and of course it would be no bad thing for Nick Henderson to be double-handed if Palladium can translate his good flat form across to hurdles. Jasmine DeVoe doesn't have an entry in the Supreme Novices Hurdle. I think that's no surprise. He's really struggled with his jumping. I'm sure the guys at the track responsible for putting the hurdles back will be delighted to hear that he's not there, because he does tend to make a mess of pretty much every hurdle he jumps. Then a few horses that are of interest. Regent Stroll. Well, he bombed out quite badly in the Cheltenham Hurdle last time, having been far too free, so it'll be no surprise to anyone that he doesn't hold an entry in the Albert Bartlett over 3 miles, but he does have an entry in the Supreme and the Turner, so they're clearly not giving up on him. And then the New Line, who was impressive when winning the Cello, he has got an entry in the Supreme Novices. I think that's well worth exploring for them. The Supreme Novices does look like a fairly weak division at this point. I mean, the Novice Hurdles don't look like much, but the Supreme looks like the weakest of the bunch, you could argue, so I think it's well worth entertaining that for the New Line. He does hold an entry in the Turners, and again, like Regent Stroll, he doesn't have an entry in the Albert Bartlett. And then the Yellow Clay. This is a horse where I've been pretty pleased to see how he's doing this year. I've got an anti-post slip on him about the Albert Bartlett. I was slightly worried to hear last time that Gordon Elliott thinks that the Turners is where he'll end up. He does have an entry in the Turners, but he has also covered that with an entry in the Albert Bartlett. So that's given me some vague hope that maybe the Yellow Clay will end up in the Albert Bartlett over 3 miles, where I think his strong stamina and his good jumping and his plenty of experience he's gained this year would stand him in good stead. So as it's Tuesday, of course, the revised handicap marks come out from the BHA handicapping team. Again this week, a slightly abbreviated handicap movers and chasers section, largely because if you can't see the racing through the fog, I'm a little bit loath to make too many strong opinions. So just one horse going up in the handicap to start with that I think is of interest, and that is Mr. Vanga, who won the Peter Marsh at Haydock at the weekend. Like I said, I thought he did well to win over that 3 mile trip. I know the ground was testing and it turned into a stamina test, and that's what won the day. But he was still dropping back significantly in trip from the 3 mile 4 of the London National. He was comfortably on top at the end. Yes, Trelawn and Royal Pagaille perhaps didn't run to the marks we expect them to do, but he's clearly a progressive young chaser. He'll be really well managed by Sarah Bradstock. He's a large horse. They take the horses down to the river to cool their legs, and he's up now to a mark of 143. The aim to Grand National has been suggested as a target. Just a word of caution, though, he would need a mark of 146 to have got a run last year. Now you get the 34 runners down from 40, so he's probably going to have to run again and run well again to even get considered into the weights. And then on top of that, he'll of course need soft ground. The Midlands National would appeal as the instant race that would suit. Of course, you've got other races like the Scottish National, but very rarely does that ground come up soft. I think the Midland National around Uttoxeter, that would perhaps give him soft ground, a stamina test over that 4 mile trip. And Mr. Vanga is certainly a horse I'm keen to keep on side, provided he has his conditions, but I think his conditions are pretty clear. The worse the ground, the better his chance. 3 horses coming down in the handicap that are of interest, and the first is Ansam, who I put up as a selection this week, but it was pretty clear from the market and the way he lined up down at the start at Ascot of the 3 mile chase that wasn't going to be his day on Saturday. In his fairness to him, the ground had dried out. I made the selection on Thursday, and the ground was predicted to be on the slow side of good to soft, and it actually dried out plenty quick enough and went off good ground. It was simply too lively for him. He was given a patient ride by Adam Wedge. He was never really put under maximum pressure, and I thought the handicap was fairly generous to give him £2 back, so he's now down to a mark of 140. That's £2 below his last winning mark. He showed plenty of zest through most of the race at Ascot over the weekend. I don't think he's a spent force, despite the fact he had a long time off, and he jumped pretty soundly. Small fields are what he needs, right-handed is what he needs, and slower ground than he got on Saturday ideally is what he needs. But he's down to a nice mark now. I'm sure Evan Williams will find a race for him, and there are plenty of these 3 mile chases around Kempton and Ascot in the next couple of months, particularly if you're not getting all wound up about going to the Cheltenham Festival. The next horse Also ran at Ascot is also a horse that has featured in my selections a lot this year, for all that I haven't actually had a run for my money, and I did leave him off this weekend, is Doddy the Great. He ran in the 2 mile 4 handicap hurdle round Ascot, and again it was a case of him ground being far too lively. He's at his best on a slower surface. I think he's going to need further as well. He does look like a horse that's developed plenty of stamina and perhaps just lost of a yard of pace, given that he was placed in the Greatwood and the Betfair hurdle last year. But he pulled up under Nico Bourneville, but he's got £3 back from the handicap. He's now down to a mark of 126. Those two good hurdle runs last year came under marks of 131 and 132, so he is well handicapped. I wouldn't be giving up on him just yet. And if the ground came up soft and he gets 2 mile 5, maybe even further, he might stay 3 miles in time. Dolly the Great is still a horse I'm keen to keep on side. And then the final one is the Harry Derham trained Nordic Tiger. He ran at Haydock over 2 mile 5 on slow ground at the weekend, and he never really featured. He was lined up at the back of the field. When you go back through his best form, his very best runs, he's been ridden prominently or indeed made the running. He was nowhere near anywhere near that position throughout the race at Haydock. Under a £7 conditional, Megan Fox, it looked like it was a run to bring him forward. On ground that was slower than ideal, he needs nice ground, but he got £4 back, sorry, £3 back. He's down to a mark now of 119. That's just £4 higher than his last winning mark, and he was a good winner off that mark at Southwell. If he gets on a bit of nicer ground, around a flat track like Southwell, he's also won right-handed a few times. I think Nordic Tiger is well weighted to win. Should just point out that Harry Derham, since returning from having a bit of an enforced absence due to the loss of his gallop, hasn't really hit his straps. He's without a runner now in 20 plus. Without a winner in 20 plus runners, so would just be monitoring the stable form. But Nordic Tiger is starting to look like a well handicapped horse again. Two new entries of novice hurdlers that have got their first mark this week that strike me of interest. First was the Grey Ghost. He won at Newcastle over 2 mile 4. Didn't look likely for much of that race. He was off the bridle quite early on the home straight at Newcastle. Juventus de Brion, the well-backed favourite, was going nicely up front, but the Grey Ghost made really good progress under Liam Harrison under a forceful ride. Got there in the closing stages and actually drew away to win, I thought, tad cosily. Juventus de Brion, who he beat, is rated 120. He beat him 2 lengths and yet has wound up with a mark of 117. You can pick holes in his earlier hurdle form, but we've mentioned before that Robbie Llewellyn hasn't had his team in absolute tip-top form this year until now. And if this is more like the best of the Grey Ghost, I think a mark of 117 is more than lenient. He'll certainly stay a lot further than this in time. And as we know, Robbie Llewellyn is a very good trainer when it comes to targeting a race and landing it. So the Grey Ghost off a mark of 117, that opening mark, looks more than fairly handicapped. Also winning and keeping intact his 2 from 2 record over hurdles, Fingal Bridge for Ollie Murphy under a power pack Sean Bowen at Market Raisin. Again, he perhaps found the ground a little bit lively. It was good soft ground. His previous wins have come on slow ground, but he was really powerful after the last, got up close home, one going away. He's been given an opening mark of 123. He looks like a talented horse. That was over 2 miles. He'll definitely stay a lot further than that. He's got some good bumper form in the book, and provided he gets back on soft ground, handicap over 2 mile 4 off a mark of 123 would not look a stretch for this talented young horse. And then to finish with 2 horses that are not moving in the handicap. And the first is the wonderful old Sam Brown, who stays on a mark of 153. Now, putting a veteran up in this sort of section, a handicap movers shaker, might look a little bit mad, but he ran a very fine race in the veterans final. It was moved to Market Raisin. It certainly didn't suit Sam Brown. The ground was far too lively for him, but he made a really good stick of it, staying on powerfully under Chad Bayman, claiming £10 to chase home Copperhead. Copperhead has looked a revitalised horse in this division this year. It's no shame in losing to him, giving him lumps of weight. And if Sam Brown can get in an open handicap on some slow ground, with Chad Bayman taking £10 off, he's impressed me with his riding so far this season. I certainly think Sam Brown would not be a horse I'd be keen to dismiss. He still looks like, despite his advancing years, he loves his racing, stays very powerfully, soft ground will suit him well. And he's bound to get plenty of that through February. So Sam Brown, for all that he's an old boy, don't be discounting him just yet. And then one horse that ran at Windsor, and again, I don't think was suited by the way the race panned out, and indeed the layout of the racetrack, was Cabral de Mathan. He stays on a mark of 139. He finished behind the Secret Squirrel at Windsor over the weekend. The Secret Squirrel, I think, would be ideally suited to Windsor. He's a nippy little horse. He can go around the bends and quickly get back into his stride. Cabrera Matan is a strong pulling horse. I think he has to be given a little bit of room and is perhaps not so easy to manoeuvre. I think he ran with real credit to finish behind the Secret Squirrel. He stays on the mark of 129, and I think when he gets 139, I should say, when he gets back on a more conventional track, a more galloping track, he's gone well at Sandown previously. A track like Ascot would suit, as would Newbury. I think Cabrera Matan is a really talented horse in the making, and the mark of 139 has not reached his ceiling just yet. So as we build up towards Cheltenham, I'm keen to bring guests each week, and I'm also keen to try and perhaps bring you guests that you perhaps wouldn't see on other podcasts, mainstream media. Be no surprise to any of you that Jukebox Man is a horse I'm a big fan of. I was a big fan of him last year. He broke my heart getting collared by Stella Story up the hill in the Albert Bartlett, but probably broke this man's heart just that little bit more. I'm really pleased to be joined by Paul Cunningham from River Tay Stables, breeder of the Jukebox Man. Paul, thanks for joining us.
You're welcome.
Jukebox Man, how was that last year? Watching him throughout last season, where he looked a really progressive horse for Ben Pauling, and then I think perhaps flew under the radar going to Cheltenham, and for so much of that race, it looked like he was going to land the spoils fairly comfortably at most stages.
It was nerve-wracking watching the whole race where everyone was watching it, and when he jumped the last, we thought we were home and hosed, and he was 4 or 5 lengths clear, jumped the last. Couldn't see him being beaten at that stage. We're probably celebrating a little bit too early, but look, that's racing for you. And I described it to one person. I was as high as an eagle soaring in the sky, and someone shot me. And it's down to earth fairly fast then, I can tell you. So that's horses for you. You're up and down in a blink of an eye. But look, it was a mighty run from him. He looked to be green and a lot to learn from it. You know, he kind of coming up the straight, he looked around a little bit, but he's made up for it this year. He's really well made up for it this year, so he has. So yeah, it was brilliant. Look, we're delighted, our only runner ever in Cheltenham. So our first run ever in Cheltenham as a breeder. So happy days, you know. And there was always better days to come. He was a big baby at the time.
Sure. And how did you come by him? Do you have many mares? I think he was the third Ask you'd bred. What was it about Ask that you liked? And was he? I mean, he's the best that the dam has produced. Was that obvious to you when he hit the floor?
Well, he's boy saddler as well. Ask is boy saddler as well. So like you couldn't really go too far wrong there, really. Do you know what I mean? He was breeding good stock at the time, and financially, he suited me financially at the time. I wouldn't be a big spender on expensive stallions. I couldn't afford it in the first place, but there's an awful lot of good race horses bred from unfashionable sires. So why not? Like, keep it small, keep your money small, and you won't be getting yourself into too much debt and difficulty then. And sure, look, the proof is in the pudding there. You know, there's plenty of good horses born from unfashionable sires. So, and he was only up the road as well, so it was handy that way too.
Sure. And how did he compare to the first two by the same sire? Do you feel that you saw a bit of start quality in him, or was he just a sort of slow burner?
He was a mighty foal when he was born. He was very like the mother. The mother was a fine big mare, and so was the filly. Liss Valley Lass was a fine big filly as well. But he was just a massive foal, so he was, and he was a brilliant walker. His front legs weren't the best, but sure, you can't have it everywhere, do you know. Do you know, that's a good few days were maybe towed out a little bit, but I think he was just a little bit extra, so he was.
Sure, and you were telling me as well that actually he's got a full brother that's been fairly late on the scene. You were saying an 8-year-old making his debut. Someone's perhaps started as a young horse, it hasn't worked out, and then they've seen him do what he did last year, scratch their head and said, "I'm sure, I've got one of those tucked away in a corner somewhere."
Yeah, Joe Hennessy have him, and I was talking to him. He said he got injured and he left him off for a bit. And the Jukebox Man came on the scene then, and he said that he needed a lead for a young filly there one day, and he decided to bring him back in. His legs were good, so he said he'd keep going, and I think his dad rides him out every day. So he was fourth first time out in Limerick, and they were delighted with him. I think they have him as a kind of a pet horse now, more so than anything, and he's a full brother to Jukebox Man, so I'd say they'll knock a bit of fun out of him. There's a race or two in him, I'd say.
That's fantastic. And you've got the Jukebox Man's half sister by Zambezi Fix.
Zambezi's son.
She's got a foal. Zambezi's son, sorry, and got a foal at foot, a son of Mutahir, by a son of Mutahir, I should say.
Sealess Mariner. He's by Sealess Mariner. A lovely coal foal. A fine big foal for her first foal. He's jet black, so he is. There's not a speck of white on him. He's gorgeous, so he is. And he's there now, and the Jukeboxes have sisters there as well. She's only a 5-year-old, so she's only a baby. So hopefully things will progress for her now down through the next couple of years.
So it's. I always think it's nice for small breeders when you have that sort of flagship horse that can completely transform your sort of fortune, if you like. Particularly if you've got relatives coming along behind. It can really build a brood, man, can't it?
Oh, it can, yeah. You have to wait a couple of years, obviously, but it's all look at the end of the day. You cover your mares, you bring the foals to sales. They have to go to a good home and come back as 3-year-olds, and hopefully get into a good yard. And it's a long process, and like John Phelan bought him off me at the sales, and John Phelan did a great job in minding him and keeping him for 4 years, and he raced him as well, so happy days. He had great luck with him. But it's a long road. When you sell them at the sales, they're as good as whoever you sell them to, like, and once they mind them, look after them and go to a good home and be fed well and looked after is the main thing, like, do you know what I mean? But it's a long road, yeah, but it's lovely when it comes up, so it does.
And this Sealess Mariner, you're a trading man. There's no temptation of you watching that last year to think, I wouldn't mind an extra slice of that, and roll the dice and put them into trading yourself?
Say that, sorry there, so I missed that bit.
And with the Sealess Mariner, the out of the half sister, you're a trading man. You'd be sending him to the sales. There's no temptation to roll the dice a little bit further and have a more involved say and run the horse yourself.
No, I like to sell them as foals if I can. I only have a small bit of land here, and I like to see them go on. And I actually enjoy watching them racing on the television more. So I wouldn't have enough property to keep a foal around for that length of time. Do you know what I mean? Because you'd be breeding, hoping to bring on new foals every year, and they wouldn't be long piling up on you.
Absolutely, it soon comes around, doesn't it? A 12-month cycle, and foals that haven't moved on. Moving forwards to this year, and knowing the family like you do you think it was always a certainty that he was gonna mature with time? And do you think that he goes one better this year? I presume he'll go for the Browns advisory. I know Ben Pauling has said if the ground came up very testing, he has got the speed for the Arkle. Do you see him as an improved horse?
Definitely, yeah. He was way stronger this year, and Ben Paul said that he came in a beast of an animal after his holidays. He was a very big horse last year, a big raw animal, and the asks seem to do better with time, so they do. A lot of the good asks, were all better horses at 6 and 7 years of age. They took time, do you know what I mean? But it's a lot of horses don't get the time anymore, like there's 4-year-olds, and but the asks seem to do better as 5 and 6-year-olds, 7-year-olds. So Ben Paul made a comment one day that he came in an absolute beast of an animal after his holidays. So he looked it in his race too. He's way stronger.
Absolutely, and I always think as well with horses going over fences that if they're a good jumper, which he undoubtedly is. And I remember Keelan saying from day one he'd been able to spot a hurdle from 10 strides out, and you never felt you were gonna see a bad stride in him. He does jump a fence very well. That of course makes it much easier to breathe and race in a more efficient way. And any stamina chink he might have had, and we should remember it was heavy ground last year over the 3-mile trip of the Albert Bartlett. That should see him home a little bit strong as well, shouldn't it?
Definitely, yeah, definitely. He won his point in Tortella in absolutely appalling conditions, and won it with his mouth open. Like, do you know what I mean? He seems to go on the soft as well. Like, do you know what I mean? But his jumping has definitely improved no end going on his the last day in Kempton there at Christmas time. He measured all his fences perfect, so he did. So he's just a big baby, so he is. I'd say you'll see a massive difference in him in Cheltenham this year now.
And I suppose then I'd only just sort of reminded myself of this. Actually, I don't quite know how I got lost in it. I mean, we're talking about a novice chaser. For you as a breeder, when you're and I know a little bit myself, having horses at home, when you're getting up in the dark mornings and working in the wet and the cold, the thought that you might have a horse that you bred coming back to Cheltenham. I mean, maybe next year for a Gold Cup, and who knows, years after that for a Gold Cup. Surely that is for you the driver to bounce out of bed, as I'm sure you do on a cold Irish morning.
When you see him, when you get the entries on the phone there, it's like a child waiting for Christmas to see that they get declared, and then you have 2 days wait, and then hoping nothing will change with the weather. It's unbelievable. It's stuff you dream about, but it's like win the lotto, but you know you're never going to win the lotto. But this is better than win the lotto, because you can sit down and watch it and know that he was born in a small little place like this. You know, it's brilliant.
No, it's fantastic, and for all that the sport can get dominated by big figures, particularly in the training ranks and the owners' ranks. When you look at the breeders, that, like you say, they do come from everywhere. They come from all sorts of mares. They come from all sorts of stallions. It's one of my favourite aspects of it, that you need a dose of luck, a good bit of knowledge, and a good following wind, and it can happen. Look, Paul, I'm not going to keep you any longer. I know you've got mares that are waiting to foal potentially the next sort of Jukebox Man stars any minute
Hopefully.
now, and I know you've been up all night. So thanks very much for your time. I really hope he goes and does it at Cheltenham. I think he's a fine horse, and hopefully he'll give you many more years of enjoyment.
Okay, thank you very much.
So that's it for another episode of Millers Movers. Thanks for joining me. I'll be back again at the same time next week, where we'll have the usual Handicap Movers and Shakers, a weekend review. And then as we build up towards the Cheltenham Festival, each week we're going to be picking out a race, giving it a proper deep dive, trying to come up with an anti-post selection. And there will as well be SBK boosted prices for that named race for 24 hours after the podcast goes live. So enjoy your week, and I'll see you same time next week.